In this video, we will be learning how to multiply by powers of 10. Before we begin, please make sure you have cut out and glued your journal sheet into your math journal. You may want to also have a highlighter handy as well as a pencil. Now let's begin. In our last lesson, we were learning about exponents and how an exponent actually represents something called repeated multiplication. For example, if we had 10 to the fourth power here, that would represent 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 4 times. Or if we were to write that in standard form, we would have 1 1 and 4 zeros, giving us the number of 10,000. In that lesson, we learned to look for patterns and noticed that the number of zeros in our product matched the number of our exponent. So, in our problems below, when we think about powers of 10, any power of 10 is any number formed by multiplying 10 by itself, pretty much any given number of times. So, if I have 10 to the first power, 10 isn't actually being multiplied by itself, it's being multiplied by 1. And if you notice, there is a pattern there, because if I look at this, I have a 1 in the exponent, and I have 1 0 in my product. So if I were to move on and now do 10 to the second power, that would mean I have multiplied 10 by itself. So I have two 10s multiplied by each other, and that would give me an answer of 100. And again, you will notice that I have two zeros in my product, and I have the number 2 as my exponent. So if I have 10 to the third power, that's representing 10 times 10 times 10, and that's going to give me an answer of 1,000. And the last example that we have here is 10 to the fourth power, and that is going to represent 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, and that's going to give us an answer of 10,000. Now, you might wonder what it's going to look like if we multiply powers of 10 by other numbers. And just like we did before with exponents, we're going to look for patterns. So if you see in our first example here, we have 5 times 10, and we know that 5 times 10 equals 50. So we might also know that 5 times 100 is going to give us an answer of 500. And if you notice, there are two zeros in my product, and there are also two zeros in my power of 10. Well, that pattern is going to continue. So if I were to take 5 times 1,000, I would have the 5, and then I would count 1, 2, 3 zeros, 1, 2, 3 zeros, and then add in my commas. Let's continue. If I'm looking at 5 times 10,000, here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. So in my answer, I'm going to have a 5 with 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros and put in my comma. And finally, I'm going to have 5 times 100,000, and that's going to give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros. So I'm going to have a 5 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros, giving me an answer of 500,000. What I'd like for you to do is pause this video and see if you can figure out what products we would have below. Now let's check your answers. Hopefully for 16 times 10, you got the answer of 160, 1 0 and 1 0. 16 times 100 gives you an answer of 1,600. 16 times 1,000 gives you 16,000. 16 times 10,000 gives you 160,000, and 16 times 100,000 gives you 1,600,000. So if we look back up here in our box, it's asking us to look for patterns, and it says when I'm multiplying by a power of 10, I want to add the same number of blank to the product as the number of blank in the power of 10. And of course, if you can think about it, the only answer could be zeros. I'm going to add the same number of zeros to the product as the number of zeros in the power of 10. Now let's look over here. We're going to use powers of 10, but we're going to use them in their exponential form. So if I were looking at 7 times 10 to the second power, we know that that actually represents 7 times 10 times 10. Because that's what 10 to the second power equals. So if I multiply 10 times 10, essentially that's going to be multiplying 7 times 100. And if I multiply 7 times 100, I'm going to get 700. Now if I look at 7 times 10 to the third power, that's going to be the same as multiplying 7 times 1,000, and that's going to give me an answer of 7,000. And in the next problem, we have 7 times 10 to the fourth. I have an exponent of 4, and so I'm going to multiply. That would be like multiplying 7 times 10,000. And that's going to give me an answer of 70,000. Now let's pause there. And I want you to look for the patterns. If you notice, I'm taking 7 times 10, but in my answer here, I have 70,000. And if you look, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. And that, again, matches the exponent in the problem. Let's look back. Here in this problem, I have 10 to the third power, giving me an exponent of 3, and in my answer I have 1, 2, 3 zeros. And even further back I have 10 to the second power, and I'm multiplying it by 7, and I get my answer, and I have 1, 2 zeros. So if you have identified that the pattern in multiplying by the exponential form is the number of zeros in your answer is going to match the number of your exponent. So if I look at 7 times 10 to the fifth power, I know that's going to be representing 7 times 100,000, but I could kind of skip that step and go into a shortcut and just kind of write my 7 and then count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros, and I'll get my answer of 700,000. Now pause the video and see if you can answer the next 4 problems on your own. Now, hopefully you were successful. If you looked at 11 times 10 to the second power, that means it's 11 times 100. So I just wrote down 11, and then I added 2 zeros at the end for my shortcut, and then added a comma, giving me my answer of 1,100. In the next problem, I have 10 to the third power, so that's going to be the same as multiplying 11 by 1,000. So I wrote down my 11, and I counted 1, 2, 3 zeros, giving me an answer of 11,000. And in my next problem, 11 times 10 to the fourth power is multiplying 11 times 10,000. So I wrote my 11 and counted 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros, added my comma, and gave me an answer of 110,000. And my final problem, 11 times 10 to the fifth, is the same as multiplying 11 times 100,000. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros, and that gives me 1,100,000. So if you look down below at my reference box, I'm going to fill in my answers. It's similar to before. It says add the same number of zeros to the product as the number of the exponent. In the space below, you'll find 4 problems. Pause the video and try them on your own. Alright, let's see how you did. Let's start with the first problem, 13 times 1,000. Hopefully you got our answer of 13,000. Yay! Our next problem, we have 26 times 10 to the fourth power. Hopefully you got our answer of 260,000. And our next problem, we have 24 times 100,000. Hopefully you got our answer of 2,400,000. And finally, we have 475 times 10 to the second power. Hopefully you got our answer of 47,500. In this lesson, you have learned how to multiply by powers of 10.